Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I have an amazing founder today, Lucas. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
This is primarily intended for the Web3 founders and want to hear about the origin story and the challenges you faced way back when and how are they evolving for you these days. So let's start with the origin story.
I actually stereotypically or cliche dropped out of university and after half a year of studying computer science and economics, and always wanted to work in Web 2 at the time. And so I spent actually the first 10 years of my career working in Web 2, and then kind of the last 5 years working in Web 3. I went from working in consumer productivity SaaS to fintech in Web 2, and at that point kind of said, okay, well, it's getting a bit boring, what is going to be the next big thing? And I was looking at either artificial intelligence or crypto, which I've never really knew of course about, but never really looked into more deeply in 2017. Then just said, maybe I'll look at crypto and start learning about it. And that was I really went down the rabbit hole, as people like to say. Honestly, I was super happy I did that because I do think it's as exciting as I think the internet was back 10, 20 years ago. And there's all this crazy opportunities to build stuff. So that's maybe my...
So that's your origin to crypto. What about the story of Centrifuge? How did you stumble upon building it?
Yeah, I mean, 2017 was pre-DeFi. It was the crazy year of ICOs. But most of what we think of today, except for Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum itself, it hasn't been around. So it kind of it's kind of hard to imagine what it was like. But so when I started looking at crypto, I said, okay, maybe we'll actually, coming from fintech and my background there, I said, well, open blockchains are gonna change how people interact with each other and how they do financial transactions. And so we started looking into this. But we were probably about 3 years too early to really do what we wanted to do. And so luckily we actually had a few investors that really believed in us, supported us even at that early stage of just finding an idea and finding even a product. And in that time, 17, 18, 19, we were still very much experimenting, doing building prototypes, maybe what today would be seen as prototypes. And then 2019 is when DeFi started to take shape, and we knew, okay, actually, and as we were kind of really involved in that from the very beginning, we knew, okay, this is where we actually are going to build our product. And so then started release the first version of really the product we have now, which is kind of bringing real world assets on chain and allowing them to be bundled into pools of loans. And we released that as a first product back then, and then went on and kind of grew this to a team of now 38 people. Did a token sale in 2021, and now really in the last 2 years grew to 90 million in TVL.
Great. And tell me about the backside story. What was troublesome, took you 6 months to figure out, and now looking back, you have a pretty good idea that other Web3 founders could benefit from?
I think Web3 is very different from Web2 in a few ways. Not saying anything new, but the legal regulatory uncertainty definitely adds so much overhead and kind of just having to figure it out. Over the last 5 years, we revised and kind of consulted with lawyers countless times in okay, how do we approach what we're doing to make sure we're operating within the law and are compliant and just at best effort. And you really, most of the times you're really just trying to do the best effort because we really don't, there's a lot of questions we don't have the answer to, right? So maybe what I would say, that's a thing where for us, especially because we work with real world assets and all these regulated products, hiring a GC that had crypto experience, that was kind of pragmatic and creative, and it's not usually what you think of a lawyer, but like able to solve these problems was extremely important, and helped us. And that was a year ago. Helped us actually a lot.
Yeah. So finding that agile GC was the parasol.
Yeah. Maybe another thing that I would say, we today are building a very complicated product in a very complicated industry that we know, like, to really get to mass adoption, we're going to still have to spend 10 years, right, building out all this infrastructure.
10 years of the old world.
Yeah, I mean, right, I guess you think, like if you think of how long it takes to build user experience, how long it took for the first smartphone to be built, right? Like how long, I mean, now we use apps every day. Apps didn't exist, like mobile apps didn't exist 10 years ago. Maybe 10 years ago, they started to exist, right? But it's a relatively novel. And before that, like the internet was not something you had in your pocket. And so I think crypto, like we're still super early, but the space gets a lot of attention and a lot of, because I think everyone sees the big potential. But you kind of have to keep in mind, like you need to like not get too lost in this and keep like iterating on the product, like doing prototyping as good as well as possible, because even though like which is kind of like I'm saying like you should prototype and be agile, which is almost like a contradiction, because in crypto oftentimes you can't be agile and you can't like just iterate quickly, and you don't want to move fast and break things, because when you break things usually you lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
So
and plus your immutable ledger to begin with.
Exactly. Yes. So like you can't, like a lot of times you're building rockets. You're trying to build basically like a rocket that can fly to the moon and actually land, right? And nothing, like you don't have any margin of error a lot of times. But still, like so what you should do is actually like don't try to build too much. Like limit the product, the thing you're trying to build, to like the smallest space design, like problem space possible, and then solve that problem well, and then go on to the next problem, because you can't like fight on 5 fronts and kind of like try it out and then like go back and like readjust, right?
Yeah, you have a mixture of failures in that case, different attempts unfolding at the same time. Yeah. So in finding that product market fit, you're thinking of the sort of modular approach and making it simpler, and targeting one's particular aspect.
We're working in an early industry, and we're working on bringing new users to crypto, real world borrowers, real world lenders that have been working in TradFi, that are looking at, okay, like how do I solve this problem better? Like we often look for, okay, like who are the right partners actually to do this, because you're not just a user today. Like if you come and you expect like this space to just like solve your problems, you'll walk away quite demotivated quickly. Like it's an industry where like you have a bunch of pioneers and early adopters that are like saying, okay, like I can be here first, and there's already like great opportunity, but you need to be willing to put in the work. And so for us, as we're growing and building our product, we look at these kind of partners much more than just like who's a user that we can solve a problem for, because while we are solving problems and we're looking at those, we actually need help from the people we work with to tell us how we solve them, to give us feedback. And so I think it's a much more, like the approach we've taken is much more collaborative.
Right. So finding the problem spaces you can target, not with just your solution, but also any of the partners that you could operate with and integrate with. Yeah. Absolutely. So that's very helpful. You want to tell me about team building and governance?
If you think of like one of the key differences between a crypto project and a like traditional company, is that like in a company you're an employee or you're a customer. Mm-hmm. In crypto, I think that border is much more muddy, right? And intentionally, actually, because what you want is you want your users to be contributors, stakeholders, right? In a way that is like much more similar to maybe a cooperative in the traditional world, where like everyone kind of like contributes to the success of building something together, and then like taking different roles in this ecosystem. And that's much bigger, much harder to do, but and therefore slower because you suddenly have a much bigger ecosystem of people that you're working with, and so you want to decentralize as fast as possible, and you want to start building that, but you also need to acknowledge that what you need to do first is you need to have a very good core team that can build enough momentum that you can kind of move forward. Because if you just decentralize without any clear vision and a clear product of what you want to build, then you have 100 people all thinking of different things when they think of your project, and they'll pull you in 100 different directions, which you don't really want, right? Because it'll just be a distraction. And in terms of decentralization and team building, I think that's a very important part. So when talking about building the core team, I think I tell you need ultimately I think that's kind of true for every startup, but maybe actually much more so for crypto. The problems we have and the problems we think we're solving, I think if I went back a year, I would have never guessed what we're doing today. If we went back 3 years, no chance. I think if you go into building a Web 2 project today, a website, a web app, something, I think we can say the problems that you're going to encounter are going to be they're going to be a very clear category of problems, and you'll find a lot of people that have experience solving these problems. I think in crypto you don't, right? So everyone's kind of just doing a lot of stuff for the first time and have to rely on very little experience and rely on maybe just a lot of just a lot of learning, researching, learning from others in the industry, connecting, leveraging your network to solve the challenges you have. So when you're hiring, I think look for the people that actually can do that, because you'll need to improvise and bring ensure that the people on the team can kind of deal with this uncertainty, with this crazy chaos, with the constantly changing direction, and grow with it, and kind of just are going to figure out for themselves what they need.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think actually the industry is super helpful, and everyone's helping each other, and that's so the more you're embedded, the more you can actually kind of still get all this info that you need and kind of grow.
Right, and other parts to plug in. Well, thank you very much for all your insights, and if you're interested, feel free to reach out.